Thank you very much. Thank you, Van. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you for bringing me here. I'm excited to be here today. I'm talking about this new project that I've been working on for a couple of years now, but a couple of years interrupted by, work. I'm actually mostly going to try and give something like a broad outline of the problem and introduce you to the basic geographies that I'm trying to talk about. And the key thing is that, when we live in a world where when we think about money, I'm old, so bear with me, but when I think about money, I think about cash, so I'm already completely dinosaur-like. But nonetheless, even if you don't think about cash, you think about national currencies, right? Here, we think about dollars. Dollars are how you buy things, even sometimes how you buy money. Like if you buy crypto, you would still use dollars to buy it and you would value the crypto in dollars, right? So each territory has a currency and it's just one currency. And all the different forms of currency are fractionally related to the basic unit, in our case, the dollar. Does that make sense? In the 18th century, this form, actually, we might just say money as such, didn't exist. There's lots of money, right? This is a highly monetized society in which money is actually extending its hold on relationships at a fairly great pace. We can tell this simply from the proliferation of marketplaces. But at the same time, there is nothing that would count as money, empirically, in experience. There are currencies and there are units of account, but none of these qualify because there are many of each of these. There are many currencies and there are many units of account. They are not necessarily shared, they are not necessarily common. In fact, then, the big question for us, which I'm not going to answer today, just the big question is to understand how we went from a world, which is quite normal for the pre-modern world, a world in which many forms of money are in use, and where money is not fungible, necessarily, where money is of limited liquidity, where money is not general purchasing power, where money, therefore, is somehow a different kind of thing from what we think of when we think of money. How do we go from that world to a world where we can talk about the rupee or the taka or whatever the national currency involved would be, right? So to start with, I'm just going to begin by sketching the kind of structural variation that's involved, like the I can hear that. The different kinds of money that work in this landscape, and then I'm going to, then we'll see. First of all, just to oversimplify the problem. If I look at any book on the economic history of the 18th century, I will see price lists, and those price lists will list prices in rupees. Easy, except nobody knows what a rupee is, right? In the 18th century, the rupee is the official currency of state. But it's very hard to know what the term rupee means in any given situation. So first and foremost, what the rupee means is the sikka. The sikka is the coin that bears the sovereign name on it with the date of the reign of that sovereign and the mint from which that coin was issued sometimes. Right? But minimally, it has to bear the name of the sovereign and the year in which it was issued. Now, in the 18th century, I'm assuming most of us know this here, but maybe not, the Mughal Empire is in fact in the process of losing its capacity to rule from the center. After Aurangzeb's death, there is a process of fragmentation and the formation of what are often referred to as de facto successor states. De facto because each of these successor states still claims its legitimacy on the basis of being vassals of the Mughal emperor, but they don't do anything like send tribute, right? So they continue to issue their money under the name of the Mughal emperor, right? So no matter which of these states, they're all producing coins with the current Mughal emperor and the year of his reign stamped on them. But they don't follow the same rules for what a coin should be made of. So the Bengal sikka is by one standard, there's no guarantee that the multiple mints of the Bengal Suba in Patna, in Murshidabad, and in Dhaka are actually using the same standard. This is the pre-modern world. We have only approximations, right? And then meanwhile, a huge amount of money is coming from Benares outside of the Bengal Suba. Benares, the financial capital of India in this era. And it's not subject to any of the same jurisdictions, right? So all of these coins are sikkas. The Bengal sikka is the preferred coin of the realm. And if I say money, I'm referring to the money that gets paid at the public tax office, which is the sikka, right? It's what do I want to receive in payment of taxes? I want to receive this coin. To make it worse still, a sikka is not a sikka even if it is a Bengal sikka. Because actually, the sikka undertakes successive devaluations as it ages. It loses about 3% of its value the year after it's issued. It loses another 2% of its value the year after that. So depending on the year of the issue, the sikka coin is worth different things, right? Beyond that, if I'm in Bihar, a sikka issued from Patna is much more valuable than a sikka issued from Murshidabad, let alone a sikka issued from Dhaka. Because I don't know what those people are doing. I know what these people are doing, right? I trust these coins. I will take your sikka, but I will charge you for it. I will take it at a discount. Okay. So the first thing is, the history books are full of references to money in the 18th century, but don't be fooled. It doesn't exist. The rupee is a unit of account. I'll talk about that. The sikka is a unit of account, but that actually doesn't map onto coins in any obvious sense, right? Meanwhile, it gets worse than that. Because if I'm a dealer, if I'm a wholesale dealer, sikkas are mostly not that useful to me. No one wants sikkas. Depending on where I am, there's going to be a commercial currency. And that commercial currency is going to be determined sub-regionally. In some areas, the commercial currency is typically a Sanat rupee. A Sanat rupee, a Sanat just means obvious, it means old, right? An old sikka. So specific year issues, no longer current, are preferred for payment. So a sikka that should no longer be as valuable becomes more valuable because I need it to make commercial payments. Right? So what's being depreciated in public payments might be appreciated in commercial payments. You can imagine the nightmare scenario of arbitrage opportunities that represents, right? And what currency counts for commercial payments varies sub-regionally. In West Bengal and in Bihar, it's mostly various versions of Sanat rupees, not just any Sanat rupee. The 15th year Sanat rupee, or the 12th year Sanat rupee, or the 4th year, right? But in East Bengal, it's the Arcot rupee that is the sole currency accepted in commercial transactions. I'll talk more about what the Arcot rupee is in a moment, okay? But meanwhile, all of that's the specie, right? Coin, metal. But if you actually look at the bulk of transactions in the 18th century, we don't have numbers, but from everything we know, it seems unimaginable that the vast majority of individual transactions mustn't have involved any specie at all. Most transactions involve marketplace currencies. I'm not talking about the scale of transactions here. I'm actually just talking about how many transactions. Because these currencies are mostly for small scale transactions. Like, for example, if I need to go to the market to buy a fish, it's useless to have a coin. It's like saying, here is a $10,000 bill, can you go pick up some milk? It doesn't work, right? A coin is too valuable for anybody to use for marketplace transactions that aren't wholesale. Coins are for wholesale and for taxes. That's what they're for. They're also for advances. So if there's a weaver, I pay the weaver in one coin. That coin is then intended for an entire delivery, right? That entire delivery requires that that coin be broken into useful currency to the weaver because the coin is useless. What I have to do is go to the market and change it into either copper coins or cowries. Copper coins, cowries, there's a million other kinds of currencies as well, but let's just go with the big ones, right? In Bihar and northwestern Bengal, copper is predominant. And the rest of Bengal, Orissa and the Highlands, cowries are predominant. And the vast majority of transactions are using cowries. In fact, even in Bihar, copper is not that good because the fact is, it's very expensive to make copper coins because you have to make a lot of them because each one is worth very little, right? You have to make a lot more small denomination coins than large denomination coins. So there's always a shortage. And if there's a shortage, they're always overvalued. And if they're overvalued, they're less good for buying a fish, right? So actually in Bihar, what most people do is just keep records of credit in their head, right? They say, remember, I gave you a fish the other day and that was worth so much. We monetize it. It's a monetary transaction that doesn't involve any cash, right? I gave you the fish. Now you owe me 1/8 of a paisa. And I will keep that in mind and we will keep a credit and we'll do a clearance process at some point annually, maybe, right? Just like the general store. Okay. Meanwhile, okay, I've got coins that count for different things. We've got different coins, all of which are technically sikkas, because arcots are technically sikkas. So they're coming from South India, as I'll explain in a moment, right? We have the sikkas, which are actually highly differentiated, and one sikka is not the same as another sikka. That's even bracketing, wear and tear, damage, all of the other things, actually even counterfeiting. The public pay office will accept a counterfeit coin at a discount. Interestingly. So we have all of this and we have to keep accounts, despite the fact that we have this huge variety of currency forms. So obviously what we need is accountancy. A way of units will allow me to measure the value of all the different coins so that 2 sikkas can be measured with 1 unit of account. The most common unit of account is called the dashmasha, which basically means a full weight coin. 10 masha is basically how much a sikka is supposed to have in it. Okay. But what the dashmasha is varies. Right? What the dashmasha is varies. Meanwhile, in the tax revenue courts, right, the Nawab's court and then the company's court later on, the sikka is a unit of account. And then you would always have to ask, how many sikkas is this sikka worth? Right? It's not transparent. But in commerce, the dashmasha is the currency, which varies depending sub-regionally where I'm using it. And we don't even know what bankers use because they keep it a secret. Okay, so it's complicated and functionally differentiated. The question for me today that I'm trying to talk about is how did this functional differentiation come to assume the form of differentiated monetary ecologies? What I'm saying here is that in some parts of the Eastern subcontinent, there is a layered, not necessarily structured, but a layered system of monetary uses differentiated by function, right? That layering is different in southeastern Bengal from what it is in Bihar. And so, in some sense, the question is not to use an ecological framework to explain the fact of monetary plurality, because that's everywhere, but rather to use an ecological approach to think about why the patterning looks the way it does in different spaces within this larger, regional chunk. Okay. So here is a map of Bengal that I took from Sugata. I should have written that. Sugata versus the Colonial Capital and Peasant Labor book. Okay. Now, I put this up, A, because I'll refer back to it because it has a lot of rivers on it, which is handy in their name. Okay, but also because, oops, hang on, there we go. There's this other map from P.J. Marshall's Bengal, the Bridgehead, same series, right? New Cambridge History of India. And what you will first of all notice, if you look carefully, is that they are not the same, right? Actually, for example, these rivers meet and then have distributaries. In the 18th century, these rivers didn't meet and had separate distributaries. Right? These are the two major rivers. This is the Ganges, and this is the Brahmaputra. Now, the first thing we need to know then is that this is a extremely mobile landscape. It's deltaic. The lowlands are deltaic. You'll already see in this map, in Marshall's map, something striking, which is Bengal is delineated by these sharp diagonal lines where it ends, above 1,000 feet or something like that. I can't remember. Land over 1,000 feet. So altitude is the determinant of the boundaries of whatever the East India Company is thinking of as the Bengal Suba, which is Bengal, theoretically Orissa, but Orissa is not under company or Nawab control, so it's under the Maratha control until the 19th century, and Bihar. And this is all a single political unit. The Highlands are the limits. Right? This mapping is more than accidental. Okay. Secondly, we notice that the lowlands, which are the core of this aspiration to state formation, is unfixed. It moves around, it changes. There's a lot of earthquakes taking place, but also there's a vast amount of water dumping silt, which produces its own dynamics. As silt builds up, rivers find different pathways and they change. Plus, this area especially is cyclonic. Right? It's every so often there's massive floods and storms, and every time there's a massive flood and a storm, what's there after it is not what was there before it. Right? This is soft, movable soil that is subject to hydrological pressures. Okay. So, how can we think about this landscape? Okay, the first thing, this is a landscape of state formation, right? That Marshall map is a state formation map. It's trying to say the state is forming in the lowlands. Okay. The center of this state formation process is the moribund Western Delta. That's this part. Right? There's Calcutta, right? There's Murshidabad, which is the old capital, right? So this area is an area where water is flowing slowly. Silting is happening. Those terrible flowers are growing in the water and killing everything. Right? This is an area where things are slowing down, and new silt is slowing in its deposits. In the Western Delta, when someone refers in writing to a Dashmasha rupee, they mean a ideal sikka, probably, to the best of my ability to reconstruct. Not an actual sikka coin, but the ideal of what a sikka should be outside of all of the variables that determine what a sikka actually is, right? So in that case, the unit of currency evaluation in commerce and the unit of currency evaluation in taxation are very proximate to each other, right? Taxation seems to have more of a hold on the general process of monetary determination of specie. In that sense, the state has been more successful in the Western Delta at laying hold of money and determining the value of money according to its taxation practices. The state is saying money is valuable because this is the rate at which I will accept it when you pay taxes, right? This is sometimes called a chattel theory. And even the limit, which is the continued preference for old rupees, is itself incorporated within that ambition because it is old Sikka coins that are used in commerce. So it's an ambiguous limit, right? It's an internal limit. We're not going to renew our coins, but we are going to keep using your coins, right? The next thing we need to think about, that's the political territorialization project. Next thing we need to think about is the coastal nature of currency dissemination. There are two key coastal currencies, which are both fundamentally dependent on the Bay of Bengal as the littoral around which these landscapes are organized. The first is cowries. Cowries are sea snails. They come from here. They're being shipped in vast quantities to primarily Balasore in Orissa for hundreds of years, right? And they've been functioning as the small money of Eastern India, spread across large parts of the subcontinent by extension, but they're the small money of Eastern India and have been for a very long time. Later, the East India companies, English and Dutch, are going to get in on the business and try to take over that trade, especially because then there's a kind of arbitrage opportunity because cowries are also in huge demand in West Africa, right? So you can both import cowries and export cowries for profit. That's the two end markets. So cowries are carried from the Maldives to Balasore, and then from Balasore, they follow the coast and they're shipped across the top part of the Bay of Bengal, right? Arakan and Bengal, east what today, Chittagong, and then the lower delta, the old delta, and then into Orissa, which in the 17th century Europeans are saying there's no money here other than cowries. Okay. Now, the coastal currencies have enormous reach, which I will talk about in a moment, but they are the basic structure of commerce throughout Eastern India. The other example is the Arcot rupee. The Arcot rupee is fascinating. So, I know you may not agree with me, but I think it's fascinating. This is the Nawab of Arcot's territory. So, what's happening here? European companies are shipping bullion until 1765 in huge quantities to South Asia to purchase textiles, mostly. Right? Now, two things can happen. They can take the silver to Bengal, and then they can get permission from the Nawab of Bengal to coin that silver into Sikkas. In return for that, the Nawab will do what princes do everywhere, which is charge. It's called seigniorage. It's a tax on producing money. In the South, there's a much more, there's a convention of handing out licenses of decentralized monetary production. The French, the English, and the Dutch all get permission to produce Arcot Sikkas essentially without paying any tax on their production. So what happens? They bring the money here, they coin it here, they're still Sikkas, right? Then they ship them to here. The Nawab of Bengal tries to stop this in the late 1730s and fails. Right? The pressure is too great, and for reasons that we'll talk about in a moment, his ability to intervene is extremely limited. So in the end, Eastern Bengal especially is flooded with Arcot rupees. And in fact, when the East India Company finally gets a mint of its own in Calcutta, mostly what it produces is Arcot rupees, not Sikka rupees, because it needs many more of those, because it needs to buy textiles, right? So, the Arcot rupee is made out of European bullion mostly, because actually it's truly a coastal currency, they don't use silver for money down here. They use gold and copper. There's no silver coins that are in use, except as an extension of the coastal trade, right? So these are only being minted for use in the Gangetic Delta, Brahmaputra Delta region. I'll skip the textile trade and the rice trade because actually there is a huge amount of trade, rice exports going from Bengal to the Coromandel coast in this era. So probably there's money coming in through commercial routes as well. Okay, now the question then is, what counts as a coast? Right, because it turns out that coasts extend far inland. So if you go up this river, you end up in a region called Sylhet. Sylhet is part of a large area that floods into a huge inland sea annually. Sylhet is famous in Britain for producing sailors. Right? To say sailor is to say Sylheti. Well, that's weird because Sylhet is very far from the sea. But it's a coastal town. It is, in fact, the coastal town for an entire surrounding area. It's the port city. So we can also talk about rivers as extended coastlines. And we can talk about upstream currency flows. As goods flow down rivers as the major transportation mechanisms for, bringing various kinds of commodities to trade centers, currency is flowing upriver. And those currencies are arkots and cowries. Cowries above all. And the cowrie is the money that reaches furthest. There are also downstream currency flows. Because if you go up the Gangetic river system, you're going into the heartland of the Mughal imperial system. And Benares is just the tip of the iceberg in terms of the series of sikka-producing mints up the Gangetic plain. And since Bengal sends quite a lot of commodities up the river, there are also flows of currency. So if you're in Western Bihar, most of the money in circulation is not Bengali money, it's Benares money. Right? Money flowing downstream rather than upstream. An Arcot rupee is not an Arcot rupee. You'll be shocked to hear. Right? The French produce Arcot rupees, and the English produce Arcot rupees, and the Dutch produce Arcot rupees. And the Nawab of Arcot sometimes produces Arcot rupees. Not very much, because he doesn't generally produce silver, but he's interested in trade. As a result, each of these rupees are valued differently. And in fact, each of these rupees has different functions. So if we go back to this map for a moment, okay, I'll just use this map. Right around here, there is a French trading station. There's another one up here, but this is the key one. Right, this is strategically located at the joint of two rivers, the Tista and the Brahmaputra. It allows them to move goods downstream, right? So this area exclusively uses French arcots. English arcots are not valuable. In this area, you can mostly use English arcots, except for particular trades the French are very involved in, right? So we can basically talk about a map that is based around rivers in which there's a further differentiation based on the strategic positioning geographically of particular European trading companies, producing what I would call concatenations of payment, chains of payment, right, in particular currencies that produce cultures of expectation. In the Eastern Delta, if you say Dash Masha, you mean an ideal arcot. Probably an English arcot, but it's actually kind of difficult to tell. But it's measured by the weight of an arcot, which is less than the weight of a sikka, right? But the unit of account that people are keeping is fundamentally shaped by this proliferation of southern silver up the river system through the penetration of new payment systems. The thing is, you would say, well, the Nawab doesn't like this. Why did the Nawab do nothing about it? The company doesn't like it either as a tax receiver. It's expensive. I'm receiving my taxes in this money I don't want. The answer is twofold. One, the East India Company is as responsible as anyone, more responsible than anyone, for the prevalence of the Arcot rupee in Eastern Bengal. It's the one who has been using it to make payments against textiles and various other commodities. The East India Company is both a taxation agent and a commercial agent. And as a taxation agent, it would like everything to be uniform as the sikka. As a commercial agent, it's busy literally minting Arcot rupees and putting them in circulation in order to create a differentiated landscape. We all know, you don't, but we historians do, and many of you presumably do know, that in East Bengal, the state's capacity to tax is much lower than in West Bengal. How do you tax people on a landscape that changes all the time, where people come and go, they farm an area until it's no longer viable and then they leave again, where I've given you a property and a body of land until it gets submerged, right? And once it's submerged, you no longer have any claim on that land, even if it reemerges from the water, right? It's very hard to tax people, which means that the ability to impose the sikka through taxation is extremely limited. So not only is the East India Company creating this multiplicity of currencies, it's also unable to actually overcome it by imposing taxes as a mechanism for determining what money will be. Then finally, that bit that's not on the map, the diagonal lines. What is the deal with that? Well, the Highlands represented both a limit and a linkage. The Highlands represents a limit to the capacity of states to actually organize territorially to control space. It's very hard to control people in the Highlands. Flat lands are much easier to rule than mountains. That's the first rule. But there are also linkages. The Highlands are full of highways, and money travels those highways. First of all, the Southwestern Silk Road. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. Oops, there it is. Basically, this is a series of connections between southwestern China and northeastern South Asia / Southeast Asia. Northern Burma, what today would be Bangladesh, the northeast in India, right? This is all a kind of highland mass. And within this area, there are highways. They're not highways, they're little pathways through the mountains. This is very rugged terrain, where crucial goods move. In fact, historically, in the late Middle Age, in the 12th to 15th centuries, one of the most important commodities that travels these highways is silver. If there's silver currency in South Asia, it's probably coming from here as much as anywhere, right? These are not insignificant highways. But no one uses silver money in this area. Silver is just a commodity for trade. They use all sorts of goods to make payments. But the thing that they use more than anything is the cowrie. Now, the thing about the cowrie is no one issues it. It's not a state currency. It can't be a state currency. You can't stamp it. You can't mark it. The cowrie is a little snail, right? It's just a little snail shell. So it's cheap. You don't have to make it. But by not making it, you also don't get to use it as a form of state power. What that also means is that it travels in complete indifference to state boundaries, right? Unlike a coin whose value is linked to territory and law, a cowrie is indifferent to territory and law, right? And so the cowrie becomes the dominant currency that links Yunnan until the 17th century when the Qing are successful, the Ming, late Ming and early Qing are successful at basically stamping it out. But until the 17th century, the cowrie is the basic currency of Yunnan. Northern Burma and Northern Siam, cowrie currency predominant. Until the 19th century, Siam has a huge amount of currency in circulation, of cowrie in circulation. And at its very core, the point of entry, which is Bengal. There are maritime routes, but it's clear that a huge amount of this currency is traveling up through Sylhet up into the Highlands. Hang on. The same thing is happening over on the north, on the, I'll get back to that in a moment. The same thing is happening up here. This is another set of highlands in the, on the western side of Bengal. And here, cowries similarly are the only money in use. And there is no coined money. In the late 16th century, one of the Mongol Kapo poems, these devotional narrative poems that are a kind of genre of the 16th to 18th century in Bengal, tells the story of a hunter who is casteless. It's from the Highlands, of course, he's casteless. He's such a good hunter. He's an amazing hunter. He's so good at it that he conquers even the lion, the king of the animals. Right, so he's become the king of the jungle. But the animals are really upset. So they go to Chandi, who is one of these ambiguous mother goddesses that are prevalent in East and South Asia. And they say, can you protect us? And she says, sure. So she protects the animals. Now, Kalketu, the hunter, is starving to death. I know I'm almost out of time. This is my final story, right? He's starving to death, right? And so Chandi comes to him because even though she's terrifying, she's also merciful, right? She goes to him and she like tests him, and he's a good guy and his wife is good. And so she's like, okay, look, I'm going to give you a prize, right? Since I've robbed you of your livelihood. Here is a ruby ring. Right? This ruby ring is valuable beyond any, it's worth more than actually there are coins in the world at this point in time. It's worth 70 million tanka, which is an unfathomable amount of money. Right? He takes this ruby ring to a money changer, he pawns it, right? He pawns the ruby ring, and the money changer goes, this is fake, I'll give you, some cowries for it. The goddess turns up and says, don't you cheat him. He's like, okay. So he somehow has 70 million taka lying around, and he gives to Kalketu. Now, Kalketu is in possession of specie, coin, the litmus of rule, right? The money that gets issued by states. And sure enough, what does he do? He sets up a state in the highlands of Birkum. Right? He sets up his own state. And she says, look, go out, clear a dwelling place where many people can settle, and give them cowries, rice, and paddy. In other words, establish the monetary order of the lowlands in the highlands. And the key moment when he transitions from casteless hunter to territorial king is coins. Right? Right. So the demarcation between sedentary territorial state and some other limit beyond is precisely the boundary between where only cowries exist and where coins exist. I'm going to wind it up there. I could keep going, but and you won't have any time to ask any questions if you do. The point would be that this is a world where our assumptions about money don't really work, and where a lot of the things we want to say about this world also don't really work. It is a world of monetization, and it's also a world of marketization. There are a lot of markets, but what is a market when markets, rather than functioning as nodes in multilateral relations of payment, function instead as sites within concatenations of payment that don't necessarily link up so easily with each other, right? Where if I want to buy this commodity, I have to pay with this coin. But if I want to buy that commodity, I have to pay with that coin. And if I want to buy this everyday commodity, I can't pay with any coin. What is commercialization? What is monetization, right? What do all of these, that there are densening nodes is clear, but I don't think we understand what is happening in this world yet until we actually understand what money is doing. And we don't understand what money is doing until we suspend our assumptions that there is something called money, and instead ask the question, not what was money, but how did money emerge?
Okay, thank you very much for that. And I think I will sort of begin with a question to get things going. Just